on Unsolved Mysteries. How could an autopsy mistake a gunshot for a stab wound? That was just one hint of a cover-up in this New York murder. He's a devout Hasidic Jew, a dedicated family man, and a brilliant con artist who made off with close to $200 million. Two friends come to blows in a bar over a woman. The next day, one is dead. Accident or murder. And parents are told their newborn daughter won't live to see her first Christmas. But then an unexpected visitor promises a miracle. Whether it's murder, larceny, or foul play, sometimes these cases are solved, thanks to you. I'm Dennis Farina, and this is Unsolved Mysteries. Rome, New York. For almost 20 years, Stanley Griesick and his brother Peter operated a few local businesses, including a gas station and a bar. Stanley and his wife Esther lived right next door to the gas station. Their life seemed happy and secure until one November night.
Dad had just gone upstairs to run Mom's bathwater. Mom went through the house doing her nightly check. She did a nightly ritual where she would go and check all the windows and doors and make sure everything was locked. My mother was deaf, and she wore a hearing aid. With a hearing aid, she could hear very well. And she had just finished in the kitchen when she heard a loud noise. And as she turned around, the back door just flew open.
Sharon said her dad raced downstairs when he heard the commotion of two men breaking into the house.
Hey, what are you doing?
And he startled the perpetrator. The shortest, stockier man was already at my mother's throat and was choking her, and in the process knocked her hearing aid out of her ear. And she said she just played dead. She just wouldn't move. She just laid there. She tried to hold her breath so they would thought she died. While she was laying on the floor, she said, they laid this pearl-handled gun next to my face. She says, I could see it. I opened my eye just a little tiny bit and I could see. They spent a good hour in the house just ransacking it totally. They took all the stuff out of the desk, threw everything on the floor, their pillows they ripped. I mean, they obviously were looking for something, but what they were looking for, I have no idea.
Eventually, the two men left. No one knows why they broke in or if they got what they came for. Sharon's mother waited until she could no longer feel any vibrations in the house, and then she tried to free herself.
Somehow she managed to get her hands untied from her feet and her feet untied. Her hands were still tied behind her back, but she did manage to go into the dining room and find my dad laying on the floor, dead.
Detectives worked the crime scene and came up with a surprising conclusion. The only things missing were 2 bottles of beer from the refrigerator.
It appeared to investigators as if the ransacking was to look for an item, possibly, or a piece of paper that Mr. Griesick may have had hidden somewhere.
The next day, Stanley's son found an important clue that the police had missed.
Hey, come here, look at this.
I happened to notice a shell casing on the rug. I mean, it wasn't embedded in the rug or anything. It was lying right out on the rug.
Oh, it's a shell casing. Don't touch it.
I picked it up with a pencil, put it in a plastic bag, and called up the Rome Police Department. One detective came over, and he looked at it. Yeah, that's a shell casing, all right. and he proceeded to put it in his pocket and said, let's not mention this to anyone for the time being.
It was a curious request, but the case would soon take an even more disturbing turn. The official autopsy report stated that Stanley was killed by a single stab wound to the heart.
Well, we knew that was totally false, that my father had been killed by a stab wound. We had found a shell casing. There was no guns in the house. The only way that shell could have got here was that it was fired in this house.
There was only one way to settle the question. Stanley's body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed. It revealed that he had been killed by a .25 caliber bullet fired at his chest. There never had been a stab wound. It would seem difficult to mistake a bullet wound for one made by a knife. Was the ruling simply an oversight, or was it deliberate? And if so, who ordered the cover-up and why? Stanley's children believe that someone wanted it to look like their father had been stabbed to death. It seemed that these questions would remain forever unanswered until a witness finally steps forward. An admitted drug dealer told police that he knew who killed Stanley Griesick.
I was tending bar one night, and a person approached me, and he knew that I owed him money, and he offered me to get even. So we drove around for a little bit, and he pulled in an alley over here, and he goes, I want you to break into Stan's house.
Why Stanley? That's my business.
And I told him, I'm not a burglar. I'm out here selling coke. You know, I'm not going to go breaking into anybody's house. He was like disturbed with me, and he goes, all right, he goes, just I'll take you back to the bar.
His information reactivated the investigation with a new set of detectives. They contacted Amy Scott, Stanley's neighbor. She told them that on the night of the murder, she was letting her dog outside when she saw a man walking through the alley towards Stanley's house. It was shortly after 11 p.m.
I let my dog stay out, maybe a half an hour to 45 minutes. And then I opened the door, I went on my porch to call my dog back in. Sam! Then I looked up and I saw this guy coming through the same pathway that I noticed before. Only this time he was headed toward a white car. He got in the car, and then I noticed there was another man in the car. And he proceeded down the street very fast.
You idiot! What do you think you're doing?
And I yelled at him because he just came within inches of hitting my dog.
A few days later, while Amy was at a local bank, she saw the men in the Lincoln again. To Amy, it seemed like they were following her.
I got really nervous, so I started my car up and I speeded down the street. I was really frightened. I just drove like crazy till I got to the police station, and I jumped out of the car and I ran up the steps where I met a policeman and I told him what was happening. We got in his car and we drove around a couple of blocks up and down, but we never saw him again.
Detectives also learned that the owner of a local bookstore had seen the two men the day before Stanley was killed. She also said they were driving a white Lincoln.
There was the tall, dark man who had on a trench coat. The other man was shorter and sandy-haired.
When investigators asked Patsy why she had not come forward with her information sooner, she told them that she had. She had spoken to one of the original detectives.
We looked in our files and found there wasn't anything put down on documentation form as to their interview with Patsy Peck.
Investigators also discovered another witness claimed to have seen the men in a local bar shortly after Stanley was killed.
He told us that a couple of men had come into the bar matching the descriptions that were published in the paper. They met with another man in the back of the bar who handed him a large sum of money. And they turned and left. He was kind of curious, so he said, "Wasn't that so-and-so?" And the individual who had given him the money said, "Yes, it was." And he said, well, why did you give him that large amount of money? And he said they'd done a job for me and now they had to leave town. As you can see here,
investigators tried to pull the threads together. What might have linked the murder, the two men, the bar, and the payoff? They discovered that the bar's liquor license was in the name of Peter Griesick, Stanley's older brother. And then Stanley's children told of a strange incident that had happened 8 months before the murder. Peter Griesick had been gravely ill at the time, and Stanley went to visit him. No one knows what was said behind that closed door, but the two brothers, who had always been close, never spoke again. Peter died 4 months later, and Stanley seemed to have changed.
I had spent a 3-day weekend with my dad. He seemed in a good mood, but he seemed a little distant. When he hugged me goodbye, he said a very strange thing. "I don't know when I'll ever see you again." And that was the last time I saw him again.
The bar registered to Peter Griesick eventually lost its liquor license for on-site gambling and the illegal sale of controlled substances.
If my father knew something, he did not share that information with my mother or my brother or my sister or I. It was just something that he kept to himself. And that was why being honest, as he was the cause of his death.
The murder of Stanley Griesick remains unsolved. Numerous questions remain unanswered. Why did the intruders ransack the house? Why did the initial investigators fail to report the details of their conversation with the bookstore owner? What was the connection between the bar, Peter Griesick, and Stanley's murder? Authorities are hoping someone watching can answer these questions. These are composite drawings of the two men seen driving the white Lincoln. If you have any information about this case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Coming up, a brilliant con man hides behind his religion as he steals millions from banks all over the world. You're about to meet a devout Hasidic Jew and father of 12. Incredibly, he is also the mastermind of one of the greatest cons in recent history. His name is Joseph Prushanowski, and by all accounts, he abided by the religious laws of the Hasidic Jews, except when it came to the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. By living a life based on strict religious values, the Hasidim have earned a reputation for honesty and rock-solid integrity. This was the perfect cover for Joseph Prushanowski. Joseph, his wife, and their children lived in an Hasidic community near Montreal. He ran an export-import business from the basement of his modest home. But that's not all he was doing. He was also the brains behind a brilliant scam, one that would net him close to $200 million. The first step of the swindle was to open his own bank. And he did it with the help of his unsuspecting assistant, Alan Feingold.
I recommend that we go with Anguilla.
The Caribbean island of Anguilla is notorious for having some of the most lenient banking standards in the world. Joseph gave Alan a couple of phony names and told him they were the owners or principals of his newly created bank.
All we need now are the signatures of our principals. That's all that's required.
Here we go.
But these are stamps.
Yeah, but they give me the authorization to use the signature.
I witnessed the signatures, which I found out afterwards wasn't exactly a legally accepted procedure, that one, according to the law, can only witness a person signing and not a signature stamp.
Yes, these are the checks.
Let's take a look here. Let me see here.
He could now issue official-looking bank cashier's checks, which were much more convincing than simple personal checks.
I have the list here.
The second step of his plan was to write out checks in the amounts of up to $1 million, which the bank in Anguilla guaranteed.
Mr. Bennett.
He would then deposit the checks in business accounts that he had set up all over the world. Joseph would contact the bank in person or by phone, and using his incredible talent of persuasion, convince the bankers to advance him the large amounts of cash, even though the checks had not yet cleared.
But before I endorse this, I need a cash advance of $750,000.
Mr. Prushanovsky, it's the policy of our bank to wait 14 days after a deposit before you can draw on your account.
So all I'm asking for is $750,000.
He's a very clever, very, very persuasive man, a man who trades on his being a very religious person when he deals with banks. Very good at persuading them to cash his checks written on funny banks in faraway places with strange-sounding names.
All right, Mr. Prushanovsky, we're going to make an exception this time, but please, in the future, give us 14 days before.
Eventually, the checks all bounced, or most of them bounced. By the time the bouncing stopped, the bank was $1 million short.
Meanwhile, Alan Feingold found himself taking calls from angry bankers demanding their money.
No, Mr. Prushanovsky is not here today.
Ultimately, a Japanese company filed a lawsuit against the two men.
Being sued for $1 million was something relatively shocking to me, and I didn't understand what was going on here.
Alan's faith was completely shattered when agents of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police stormed Joseph's office.
When was the last time you saw Mr. Prushanovsky?
Alan Feingold was hired by Prushanovsky when he was 21 years old. He was very naive. He didn't know very much about the business world. So he could not even contemplate the possibility that Prushanovsky had a criminal mind whenever he was asked to do things for him.
Alan was cleared of any involvement, and he agreed to help investigators unravel the complex ripoffs. Canadian authorities searched the house.
This is it?
But came up empty-handed. The basement office had been cleared out, and Prushanovsky had fled, taking his wife and 10 of his children. His oldest son and daughter planned to join him later.
Do you know what sort of work your father
From
does?
his Canadian operations alone, Prushanovsky left a trail of scams totaling more than $2 million.
He disappears off the face of the earth. No one seems ever to see him, hear from him again. But what then happens is all of a sudden, Joseph Weiss starts to appear. And Joseph Weiss operates fraud on exactly the same way that Joseph Prushanovsky did.
Joseph Weiss and Joseph Prushanovsky were one and the same. By now, his swindles were becoming absurdly huge. Over a 2-year period, financial institutions across Europe lost more than $100 million. The astounding total exceeded $190 million. Finally, this master con man came up with one more brilliant plan. He negotiated to return some of the stolen money.
Okay, 50 cents on the dollar.
He knows that banks don't like to go to the police. They don't like to prosecute people. What they want is their money back. So they will settle. Well, what that, of course, does is, by and large, it removes the lender from being a complainant to create a criminal prosecution problem for Prushanovsky in that particular country. And he's used that tactic very successfully all over the world.
However, a few banks were not willing to settle, and arrest warrants were issued for the con man. So, what did Joseph Prushanovsky do with the millions that he stole?
What is unique about Joseph Prushanovsky is there is no evidence that he has actually personally benefited in any way at all from these frauds.
In fact, authorities believe that he used the stolen money to set up legitimate businesses and used those profits to provide housing, education, and other services to the Hasidic community.
Prushanovsky, I think, likes to see himself as a Robin Hood figure. It's a way of giving a rationalization to what he does.
I feel that it has caused irreparable damage for the Jewish community, as I say, around the globe, because it helps to portray an image of religious Jewish people, or Jewish people in general, as being crooks and robbers, which, of course, is not the truth as to the basic doctrines of our faith and how we practice.
Update. After more than 10 years on the run, Joseph Prushanovsky was arrested in Israel. There, police received a tip from a man who Joseph had been counseling. He was convicted of 7 fraud charges in a Jerusalem court and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Here in the United States, Prushanovsky is still wanted by the FBI on multiple counts of bank fraud. Next, a man is found dead in his garage the morning after a barroom brawl. Was it an accident or foul play? Edmore, North Dakota. 3:30 p.m. on a cool October day.
What did you find when you first came to the door?
Police in this small town begin to investigate the death of a local auto repairman. An hour earlier, the body of 27-year-old Kenneth Ng was discovered in his own garage by his uncle. The cause of death was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning. Initially, police viewed it as a suicide.
Kenny had too much going for him to be committing suicide. That was way too far. He didn't have any trouble, so it would bother him that much.
But almost immediately, some of the evidence began to contradict the suicide theory. Why was a fully loaded rifle found just 6 feet away from Kenneth's body? There was a small pool of blood on the floor. Where did it come from? Even more puzzling was the fact that the car's ignition had been turned off. If Kenneth had in fact committed suicide, he couldn't have turned off the engine. Then who did? Kenneth Ng's family insisted that suicide was out of the question. But if foul play was involved, who had a motive and the opportunity to commit the crime? Within 12 hours, the police found a potential suspect who had both. 2 a.m. Kunkel's Bar, the night Kenneth died. At closing time, only 2 customers remained, Kenneth and Curtis Heck, another auto repairman.
Closing up, you gotta go.
I'm taking you home tonight.
I got a ride.
Who are you going with?
Curtis.
You really are a tramp, aren't you?
Out.
I want to talk to you. Just going home with me. Get your hands off me!
Neither one of us are Muhammad Ali. I mean, it was rolling around on the floor wrestling and a bunch of dumb stuff. There was some punches thrown back and forth, but nobody really got hurt. At one point, I got him down on the floor, and I held him down there, and I told him I'm going to let you up. And I said, when I let you up, I want you to just walk out the door.
Moments later, Kenneth retaliated.
I heard the crash out front, and I knew what it was as soon as I heard it. And I seen my pickup out there. It had been broadsided. I thought about just forgetting the whole thing, but the more I thought about it, I thought, me and Kenny were both body men, and he had just annihilated my pickup. So I thought, if I'm gonna have to fix my vehicle, then he's gonna have to fix his.
Heck decided to get even. About an hour later, he and the bartender drove to Kenneth's home, where they saw his truck parked in the driveway.
Curtis! Curtis!
I heard a noise coming from the garage, a groaning sound. So I went around to the back door, and I opened up the door, and I went in.
You know you totaled my truck, don't you?
I should have realized, that there was something wrong with him, but I didn't. Well, the guy just smashed my pickup all to pieces, and I figured he was sick from drinking, so I figured go ahead and spend the night on the garage floor.
According to the official police report, this is the last time that Kenneth was seen alive.
It doesn't make me very happy to know that I was the last person to see him alive and walked out the door and left him there.
I believe that Kenneth Engie, when he was in the garage and it became cool, started the vehicle, sat there and waited for Curtis Heck to come to the garage for the confrontation that was bound to happen. Realizing that something is happening to him, at this point I believe he turned the vehicle off that was in the garage, started to head for the door, and didn't quite make it to the door before he collapsed. Time passed, and he died waiting for Curtis Heck.
Kenneth's uncle disagrees with the official theory.
Kenny was a little bit smarter than that to start a vehicle up and leave it running in the garage while he was still in there.
Richard believes that his nephew heard Heck kicking his truck and then fought with him when he came into the garage.
He fell down and probably was knocked unconscious, and Kurt just shut the door and walked away, and then realized the truck was running and come back and went in and shut it off. With a sealed garage, there was still enough carbon monoxide fumes in there to still do somebody in.
The autopsy does not indicate that there was any assault on that body, and I don't believe there was.
There was a vehicle in his garage, but it wasn't running, and I don't remember seeing any smoke in the garage.
Did Kenneth start up the truck to keep warm until Curtis Heck arrived? He was a trained mechanic, and he had to know the dangers of running an engine in a small, enclosed space, unless alcohol had impaired his judgment. But if a drunken Kenneth did start the truck and was overcome by fumes, how could he have had the clarity of mind to cut the engine, but was unable to reach the nearby door? And finally, if it was not Kenneth who turned off the ignition, then who did and left him on the floor to die?
We believe that the death occurred from a lethal dose of carbon monoxide and that there was no criminal foul play involved. Law enforcement has officially closed this case.
There just doesn't seem to be a clear-cut answer to it. It's been hell on everybody is what it's been, and I'd like to see an answer to it someplace.
I don't think they'll ever have a final that says this is exactly what happened. There's too many loose ends.
Kenneth Engie's family still believes that the whole story is yet to be revealed. If you have any information that can shed new light on this case, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Next, a Christmas miracle saves the life of an infant girl suffering from a fatal liver disease. Seattle, Washington. Jolene and Terry Headland's third child had just been born, a daughter named Taryn. Even though they were overjoyed with their new arrival, for some reason, Jolene felt uneasy.
Terry, do you think she looks okay?
As they handed her to me, she looked up at me, and her eyes had this look in them like, help me. And it bothered me from the time she was born.
Taryn's doctors, however, pronounced her healthy and sent her home. But within a short time, she refused to eat and had to have surgery to correct 2 abdominal hernias. The routine procedure should have taken only 2 hours. Finally, Taryn's doctors told him that she had been taken to the ICU because her abdomen was filling with fluid.
Seems to be a problem with Taryn.
Doctors believed her liver was the problem.
During the surgery, we discovered an abnormal amount of fluid in her abdomen.
It was a helpless feeling. I remember asking the doctor, what can we do? How what can we do to make her feel better? And then the doctor said, just be here, just touch her and let her know you're here. So we did. We didn't leave her. We were there every day for the next couple weeks.
Lab tests later revealed that Taryn had Wolman's disease. Her body lacked a critical enzyme. Without it, her liver would shut down and she would die. There was no known cure. 2 days before Christmas, Jolene and Terry had a meeting with Taryn's pediatrician.
The weekend before their appointment was one of the hardest weekends I've ever had as a physician, because I couldn't decide whether I should tell them that their baby was dying on Monday, or should I wait until after Christmas to give them, that awful news. There's no easy way to do this. The reason that she's not eating is because her body is shutting down. She's preparing to die.
I just broke down. It was hard to accept it, to give into it.
It was like a ton of bricks hitting you. Somebody's actually telling us that our daughter's dying.
Jolene and Terry returned home heartbroken and in shock. They realized that Taryn might not even see her first Christmas. The Headlands were too overwhelmed to call anyone with the devastating news. But around 9:30 that night, Terry's brother-in-law, Wayne Rogers, just happened to stop by. Only later would they learn of the inspiration behind this unexpected visit.
Hi, Wayne. About 8:45, and I was kind of tired, so I went off to bed. This voice came to me that was very strong and very loud and very clear. The voice said to me, get up, go over and put your hand on Taryn's stomach and pray, and she will be okay. It wasn't something that I was, laying there dreaming of or something like that. It was a voice just as clear as I'm talking to you.
Hi, Terry. You mind if I hold her?
Wayne asked if he could be alone with Taryn.
I looked down at Taryn's little brown eyes, and I put my hand on her stomach. I said a prayer. I don't know exactly what I said. Please, Lord, make her better. I've come to do what, you asked me to do. Please make her better. And then when I was through, I picked her up and I took her back in the other room, and I had a good feeling that everything was going to be all right.
You got her?
So, Wayne, what brings you by this time of night?
I'm here because I believe in miracles.
Wayne left without saying another word.
Look, Terry, she's taking her bottle.
Later that evening, they received the best Christmas present ever. For the first time in weeks, Taryn drank 2 full ounces of formula, and she continued to get better. As if by magic, Taryn's body had begun to produce the missing enzyme, and her liver was functioning normally. It was only then that Terry and Jolene asked Wayne about his Christmas visit.
I didn't do this to be a hero. I didn't do this. The only reason I did do it was because I believed in the voice.
When I was listening to Wayne tell me the story, I was covered in goosebumps, and there wasn't one doubt in my mind that that was a miracle, that that's why Taryn was cured. And Wayne said to me, you can believe me or not, but that's what happened. And I remember I said to Wayne, oh, I believe you, because I have the proof.
Update. Today, Taryn Headland is happy and healthy and shows no sign of the incurable illness that once threatened her life.
From a medical standpoint, there is no spontaneous remission from the kind of disease that Taryn Headland had. There simply is no explanation along conventional medical lines.
Perhaps medical science will one day be able to explain what happened. But the headlands will always believe that Taryn was saved by a Christmas miracle. Coming up, when a man disappears, his family learns that he has lived a lie for decades. Previously, we profiled the baffling case of Alex Cooper, a devoted husband and father of 5 who disappeared without a trace. One spring day, his car was discovered a few miles from his home in British Columbia. Despite a massive search, no sign of him was ever found. A year later, Alex was legally declared dead.
I'm calling in regards to Alex Cooper, birth certificate.
When his wife Margaret tried to obtain his birth papers, she made a surprising discovery. There were no official records of her husband prior to their marriage in 1952. As far as anyone can tell, Alex Cooper simply did not and had never existed. 4 years after he vanished, authorities learned that Alex was living in Toronto, Canada. But before he can be questioned, Alex disappeared again.
He's got this family that care about him. And if he's out there living among strangers, he should rethink this thing. We deserve it, and so does he.
Who was Alex Cooper? And why had he used an alias and lived a lie for more than 35 years? Update. Shortly after this story aired, a viewer recognized Alex and called authorities. During questioning, the mystery surrounding his life began to unravel. Alex told police that his true name was Alban Arsenault. As a young man, he was accused of robbing an office of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, where he was working at the time.
I was young, and I panicked. And I said to myself, there is no way I'm going to take the fall for this because I didn't do it. I took off at that time, and I became Alexander Cooper at that point.
A few years later, Alex married Margaret. He had no idea that the criminal charges that might have been filed against him had probably been dropped. For more than 35 years, he kept his true identity a secret. Then, as his 65th birthday approached, Alex's past began to catch up with him.
I was due for pension, and you're required to submit a birth certificate. I knew I couldn't produce one. For several months prior to this, I knew this was coming up. I couldn't bring myself about to tell my family. So I walked away. It was a snap decision, and it was a wrong one.
2 days after he was questioned by authorities, Alex was reunited with his family after more than 5 years.
We were a very close family, and this has been very devastating for all of us, including Alex. I'm really hoping that we can work through this and put it back together, if not the way it is, maybe something better.
We can't pick up where we left off because things have changed. But we're going to start fresh, take it a day at a time.
The way I feel, I don't deserve for anybody to accept my apology. That what I'd done, abandonment of your family to me is one hell of a crime. And the biggest job for me at this point will be to make amends, and I would say it'll probably take me the rest of my life.
The advertisement read, wholesale medical supply distributor wanted. Investment of $18,000 required. This ad was placed in over 90 newspapers across America. It seemed like a dream come true. It was anything but. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Home to Fidelity National Medical Supply. They invited potential investors to visit the company headquarters. One person who took advantage of that offer was a man we'll call Robert Jones. One day in January, Robert Jones was driven to the offices in a limousine provided by the company. He had arrived in town the day before and wanted to see the operation in person before making an investment.
I checked with the Better Business Bureau in Oklahoma City. There was no complaints there. I had them checked out with a national credit firm, and all their resources checked out the same with this firm. I was satisfied that they were legitimate.
I can't take you into the warehouse because it's a bonded warehouse. You know, we have pharmaceuticals and, well, you know how it is.
The warehouse was equally impressive. Thousands of boxes were stacked behind locked doors, waiting to be delivered. Robert took the plunge and bought a partnership for $54,000, his entire life savings. He was just one of the more than 300 people who made investments totaling $1.2 million. But as the money flooded in, the Criminal Investigation Unit of the IRS became increasingly suspicious. 3 weeks later, the company was raided.
When they went into the boxes, they found that they were completely empty. We found no evidence that Fidelity had in any way purchased, ordered, received, or shipped during the entire course of their business life any medical supplies.
The inventory which we found when we executed search warrants at their warehouse would fit on the side of my desk.
These are not amateurs. These people have obviously done this in the past. They knew what they were doing. They did it very quickly. They knew how to get in. They knew how to get out. They knew how to set up the accounts without putting fingerprints on the accounts.
Update. Authorities finally determined that the two key figures involved in the scam were Harold Frederick Kruger and Thomas Alfred Flanagan. Kruger was eventually arrested in San Antonio. Flanagan was captured in Atlanta after one of our viewers called police. Both were convicted of conspiracy, mail and wire fraud, and were sentenced to 9.5 years in prison. They have since been released.